So I'm going to talk about cloud application portability today and the importance of it. And I see it as something that's not really even thought about yet with all these PaaS stuff coming out. So first of all, my name's Ingy.net. I work for ActiveState, and I work on their PaaS offering called Staccato. So what is Staccato? Staccato is a PaaS framework. It's made by ActiveState. Who knows ActiveState in the audience? So ActiveState back in the 90s, they made ActivePerl and ActivePython. Basically, if you had Windows and wanted to run Perl, back then that's what you had to do. A lot of people use Komodo. Has anybody heard of Komodo? It's definitely in the Drupal arena. When I went to their conference, everybody used it. And last year they got into the cloud biz and started Staccato. So ActiveState always takes popular open source stuff and makes it ready for the enterprise. Staccato is actually built over Cloud Foundry's, VMware's Cloud Foundry PaaS offering, which is an open source offering. So basically, ActiveState did their old trick of taking Cloud Foundry, looking at what needed to be done to actually run it in the enterprise, and making that so. To people who don't really understand what private PaaS is, we say it's Heroku in a box. So who's heard of Heroku? So Heroku makes it really easy to write an application and push it off into the cloud. ActiveState decided that a niche that's really important in the enterprise was to give private PaaS so that you run it in your own data centers or wherever you want to run it. And so sometimes we call it Heroku in a box.
Can I have a quick question before you
go? Yeah.
I was browsing Heroku just now, like half an hour ago.
Yeah.
And what is a worker? Like they have like two things that's called worker. I was not sure what worker is.
The question is, what is a Heroku worker? And who would like to answer that? Anybody? Yes.
Yeah, a worker is basically a background job, so it doesn't need to actually connect to an HTTP port. Whereas their normal instance does connect to HTTP.
Thank you very much.
It says two kinds of workers. One is for queues and another
Heroku worker is actually the next session. But yeah, so as soon as I'm done. Okay, so the cool thing about ActiveState is it's actually out there. It's 1.0 of Staccato. It's 1.0 as of last February, and it's 1.2 as of today. So we've actually did our second full release this morning, and it's pretty solid. Anyway, I'm not really here to talk about Staccato. I just wanted to say that I work for a company that makes a thing that's a PaaS offering. And it's called Staccato, and now you all know what it is. So that's really what I want to say. Tomorrow, I'm going to give a workshop on how to install Staccato. Now, the cool thing about it is that you can actually just run it entirely on your own laptop, and that exact same VM you can take and turn it into a cluster on Amazon if you wanted to. It's the exact same bits. But the way to start using Staccato is to download it and install it on your laptop, and it comes with an app store where you can just, 5 minutes to install the PaaS, then a couple minutes to install each app, and then you start playing around with creating multiple users and putting those users in groups, and all of a sudden you're like a PaaS provider on your own laptop. And if you find that that works out well for you, you can push it off into a cluster and license it for money from ActiveState. So anyway, I'm going to give a whole, I'm sure it won't take 3 hours because all those things I told you only take 5 minutes, right? But I have 3 hours to do that, and we can play around, show you how to actually create your own app store, which is as easy as no pasting a piece of JSON somewhere on the internet. It's really simple. So who is Ingy.net? That's actually my name, Ingy döt. You can't actually use that umlaut in an American name, so in America I'm Ingy.net. That's me. One thing I invented was YAML. Has anybody used YAML in the audience or heard of it, played with it? So a serialization language that it's actually really popular in all of these PaaS things like OpenShift and in Staccato itself. It's kind of neat to actually, I'm like, oh, yeah, I recognize that format. Acmeism is my kind of thing that I've been doing that's just working on programming for several languages at once, and all of this POS stuff really applies to that because it's all multilingual. I talked at a lot of open source conferences, and I actually worked for ActiveState about 12 years ago doing active Perl stuff for them, and then I really liked what they were doing with this new cloud stuff, so I came back last year. So who else does POS besides ActiveState? Well, these 15 different offerings, actually, I think it was 15, but then I realized one was a duplicate, so it's 14. But there's actually way more than this, but I thought it would be cute to make a little ASCII cloud out of all the POS providers. Now, that's not all the cloud providers. That's just people doing platform as a service, right? Yeah, so, and a lot of them are based very close to here. So, what kind of apps run on these POSes? And actually, so on Heroku, you know, they boast that they have, I don't know what they boast actually, because I haven't read their marketing stuff lately, but you know, they have millions of apps running, right? But what does that really mean? If it's like millions of copies of Drupal running, then it's one app, right? So it's like, the next thing coming down the pipe is to make every app that's out there, every open source project that's an app, every thing that's inside an enterprise thing is an app, run on POSes. And if it's open, it should be running on every POS offering out there. Well, if we go back, that's a big cloud of POSes. So what needs to actually happen to make a popular app like Drupal or WordPress or Bugzilla or something like that run on one of these POSes, let alone 14 of these POSes? So that's the question. So I should actually, here, I'm going to add in OpenShift. Since it's an editor, I can just, I'm not a very fast typer. I was just playing around on GitHub and looked at all the example and quick start apps that they had, and there's 50 ready to go that you could just install into OpenShift. Last night, my coworker Diane was showing me that Standing Cloud actually has 105 apps. And I didn't go through and find out who has all these apps, but these are basically the same kind of pool of popular apps, and people make them work on their POSes. Staccato right now has 65 apps that we've developed. Some of them just print out the environment or print hello world in an obscure language like Scala, you know, just so you can see how a Scala app would work. And some of them are actually popular software projects that you would want to deploy. So let me actually show you Staccato real quick. When you boot up a Staccato VM on your laptop, it would look like this. And it gives you a little URL with a unique name. So this is Staccato-HHH6. That was actually randomly generated. It sounded kind of creepy, like at least it's not 666H, which I think would be slightly creepier. So when a Staccato VM boots up, it has a management console that's run out of it so that you can actually go and control it as an admin. And that's what I'm doing right here. And I'm only showing you this because Staccato, so this is the admin console, and you can look at running graphs of the system. Hopefully you can look at running graphs of the system. So we hit a spike at 145, not sure why that was. I was probably playing around with it. But here's the cool thing, is the App Store. Now this isn't a store like that you pay money for apps. This is just all of the 65 apps that run in Staccato. Oh, and right now, they're kind of doubled up because this is more of tomorrow's talk, but I added a feature such that you can add your own stores. And we'll see how you do that tomorrow if you come to the session. But I added a test store, so now that should deduplicate. Should hopefully deduplicate. Did not deduplicate the stores. All right, so just ignore the dupes. And so all of these apps that you see here are actually just meta information pointing out at GitHub. And so when I click install on one of those apps, it actually just goes and clones this and does the same kind of steps as if I was pushing it from the terminal. But it's really cool because you can have one click. you can see all these apps and you're like, oh, I want to try this, I want to try this, and you just click them and you don't have to worry about the terminal. It makes, so anyway, that's the collection of apps. As I started, I was kind of the one that was behind making this web console for Staccato, because when I came on board, everybody was just doing stuff through a terminal, and it seemed to be a little awkward because it was really talking in a REST API back to the VM. Why wouldn't you put a web thing in front of a REST API? So I did. And as I started creating, or started looking at all these apps, I'm like, well, this is kind of, as a developer, this is nuts. Why should I have to do something different to have Drupal running on Heroku, or Drupal running on Staccato, or Drupal running on OpenShift? If I'm the guy who made Drupal, well, see, so that's a popular app, so everybody's going to do it, right? But let's say you're making a web app, and it's just starting to get popular, and you realize, oh, if I can make it work on Heroku, then I'll do that, because then everybody will start deploying it on Heroku. You would do that, but then you're like, oh yeah, but then there's Staccato. Should I do what they want me to do? And there's OpenShift. Should I do what they want me to do? After a while, there's like, first you have to figure all this out, right? So I was like, all of these big cloud of providers that I showed on that screen with, let me escape to, there we go. All of these providers should at least agree on what needs to be done at some level to make the apps, by the developer, to provide the information such that the app can run on any POS. That's the dream. And so, getting back to this, right, if I'm a developer, do I need to would I want to make 15 tweaks to have it run on 15 POSes? No. Would I do it once? Definitely. What's the solution? I don't know. But I have a way to find out. And the way to find out is just start doing it, right? So get the 100 most popular apps, put them out there and let people port them, or make them work on all the things, and then look at what they had to do and compare that information. That's the idea, and I call that Cloud Apps. So Cloud Apps is a GitHub organization. I'm going to go to this, maybe I have it loaded up here. Sorry, this is a... So Staccato Apps is actually the GitHub organization where all the things that work on Staccato is, but this actually is, Cloud Apps is an organization of forks. And right now I've forked a bunch of projects from Staccato Apps and from OpenShift. Mark and I are pretty good friends, and Mark's representing OpenShift. We both do dev evangelists and hang out in coffee shops in Seattle once in a while. And he concurs with me that we need to find out how to find one set of metadata that can make your apps run on these various platforms. So,
can I ask a silly question?
Yeah.
Why can't they now? Like if I write a little hello world app in Node.js and I push it up on Azure and I push it up on Staccato or whatever,
I think it's
why
time.
do you have to change something?
They keep their metadata in different formats. They lay their directory systems out differently. They declare what dependencies they have differently.
So here's something called OwnCloud. Has anybody heard of OwnCloud? It's actually pretty cool to show running out of Staccato here, because, so if I go to the Staccato applications I have installed here, I pre-installed OwnCloud, and if I run it, I'm going to launch it here. Didn't actually, last time I came up, well, that was unexpected. When I installed it the first time I ran it, it actually showed me the application without making me log in, so this is the first time I had used it, so I didn't expect to see this. Basically, it's like a calendar system, and a photo system, and an iTunes system, and a thing that you run yourself. And you can share it with people, but basically you run it on your own cloud. So it's a really cool app to install, and I can install it directly from the App Store. I don't want to, that would take probably a minute to spin up, and it's not that important, but this app is running out of the Staccato VM. And so to make this run, the Staccato people forked OwnCloud on GitHub, and then they did two things to it. They added a staccato.yaml file that said, can people read that, or should I blow it up a little? There. So YAML, my favorite format. Yeah, they said that it needed MySQL and a persistent file system, that it ran under PHP, and it needed 128 megabytes of RAM to run. So they did that, and then they did one other thing. Oops. They actually configured the thing using this PHP-conf. I believe. Okay. So if you look under here, VCAP services, VCAP applications, when you deploy a Staccato app, and this actually was inherited from Cloud Foundry, which Staccato was built over, all of the important pieces of information that you need are in environment variables, and so the PHP needs to actually get those. So if I was the person who wrote this project, the OwnCloud, if I was the owner, if you were the person who wrote OwnCloud, you wouldn't know about VCAP services and VCAP application, but if somebody wanted to make it work on Staccato, they would have to change these two files. They'd have to add the Staccato YAML file and add this file. On Marks, I just found out on OpenShift, you would actually have to reorganize all the files and do a lot of other different things and add some various files and some startup files. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it doesn't really matter how much complication it is. What matters is that it's different between the POSes. And literally, you can see how little information was needed to get it run on Staccato. I think at the end of the day, probably just as little information was really needed by OpenShift. It's just in a different type of style. So my idea here is that I have this Cloud Apps repo, and I give commit access to anybody who wants to add projects to it or hack on it. Ingy.net is actually very easy to find online, so just find me, and if you have a GitHub account, I will add you to the Cloud Apps organization. And I want to build up 100 apps by the end of the year that run on a dozen POSes to different degrees, and we could even make it into a competition, right? So you just have, oh look, Heroku, the master of all POSes, only has 3 apps that work on Cloud Apps, whereas OpenShift has 57. So it's like you kind of get the. I think developers work off of that kind of spirit of like, oh, we're better than them, just add all this stuff, and then it's all done, and then we look at the diffs of what everybody did to get them to run. So the thinking is, in a Git term, is that you do a branch, like an OpenShift branch and a Staccato branch and a Heroku branch, and then you compare all the branches to master, which should mirror the upstream, and you just see what's needed. And I'm kind of just waxing philosophical here, but I was talking with it last night, and somebody had a good idea. It's like you don't have to come up with a standard way of doing it. What you have to do is come up with a standard set of data that you can use to generate the various different ways to do it. It would be nice if they all did it in a standard way, and people should grow towards standards, but to get to where a developer can just specify a minimal amount of data, and then it can reformat to the Staccato way, to the Heroku way, to the OpenShift way, I think maybe that's the solution. So the next thing I want to do is ask you guys what you think. So this is basically questions. I'm done. Yeah?
I think this is very important. I work on OpenShift as well. Not only to deploy your initial one, but also maybe you deploy on OpenShift and you decide you hate Red Hat and you want to move somewhere else. And so this will allow the user or the owner of the code to have more freedom on what they actually do once they go into the cloud and not be locked in. Right? However, here, OpenCloudConf, some of that falls down when you start talking about proprietary POS vendors, like Google App Engine, for example. If you're using a proprietary data store, that probably just won't work somewhere else. And so there's another layer on.
I guess I'm coming, that's an interesting angle, because I come at this more from the open source thing where I create the next cool web app and I put it out on GitHub and I expect to be famous, but it's like, and if I can get it to run on 12 POSes with like 5 lines, I'll add those 5 lines. But you're more from you developed an app to work on OpenShift and now you want to move over to...
Yeah, I'm more from a user, not a developer, right? former IT manager, that's what I think. If I'm deploying applications to a cloud for my company,
Right.
I need to be able to quickly move between vendors. If negotiations break down, price increases like Google just did,
Yeah.
varying different reasons.
Can I just challenge an underlying assumption here is that you want to move from one pass to another. I mean, it seems like pass is a good tool for rapid prototyping or giving a developer an on-ramp to get something out quickly. Once that's proven or tested, maybe you're going to move that app back into a traditional enterprise environment, or, you know, not thinking these are all at-scale web apps. These are more of these departmental type apps. So why would, if you're kind of using it for rapid prototyping, why would you move it from one to another?
I think Mark wants to answer that. And I'll let him.
Maybe that's not the primary use case for PaaS.
It is a use case for PaaS, but not the only one. And one thing I think is going to become more important over time is that it's looking more and more like PaaS is a better and easier orchestration framework for scaling applications. Writing applications that can scale themselves turns out to be very hard. And we thought we could solve that problem with automated system administration and orchestration frameworks. It turns out that scripting and orchestration frameworks that automatically scales is very hard. Whereas for the applications that is, when you give up a bunch of the flexibility so that you fit inside the PaaS model, it turns out that it's very easy to have most of your scaling, not up to Facebook scale, but up to tens of thousands of users scale. Having your PaaS do your scaling for you makes it easier to write your application.
Okay.
I think we're going to reach the point where we're going to say you write for a PaaS and you may move to different PaaS containers, but you're unlikely to say you're likely to say there's not much to be gained by actually moving into standard hosting.
Well, let me throw out another future. We all know about iPhone apps, right? And there's a whole ecosystem for developing that. Maybe one of the reasons that there aren't as many web apps as iPhone apps, well, I mean, there's the $3 monetization or whatever, but deploying those is still a bit of a barrier, right? You write something that's really cool, but then you say, yeah, just install this. It's always a bit of a barrier. When PaaS becomes that abstraction such that you never think, you just push a button to deploy, then we're going to see, and as computing gets easier, I mean, abstractions happen, over and over in computing, and people don't need college degrees to get into the game anymore. And, you know what I mean? It's like, they haven't for a very long time, but I'm actually old enough to remember when they did. And punch cards. I was just going to say punch cards. Although I heard a couple other guys in this conference talking about punch cards. Maybe you? Was it? No? No punch cards? Somebody last night over here was talking about the good old days. They were even naming they knew the name of the device that read the punch cards. I couldn't believe it. I definitely haven't remembered that. What? Yeah. But they had the IBM model number, and I'm like, really? You remember that stuff? Crazy.
So there's another little bit of a flavor on your question too. Is that why would someone want to change from one PaaS to another?
You pick the one you like.
Well, and lots of there'll be Werner Vogel, the oft-quoted Amazon CTO said something like, "Let 1,000 platforms bloom." You're just never going to build a PaaS. But I think what you'll see is there'll be niche PaaS. There'll be PaaS that have like awesome Cassandra support or Hadoop support, and you'll start seeing different flavors of PaaS out there. So the quote that Werner Vogel always says is, "Let 1,000 platforms bloom." And I think that's what we're seeing, is that there's going to be lots of different platforms as a service offerings, proprietary ones, open source ones built on open source, all, and every kind of hybrid in between. But what you're going to see are niche vendors, people who have certain specific tools. Right now, there's also, like, Apprenda is a very .NET PaaS platform. They're all out happy about .NET. God forbid that I have to do that platform, but there's a lot of dynamic language ones. There's a lot of Java-focused ones. There's a lot of specific services. So there are reasons why you'll want to move to one PaaS vendor to another to get support for obscure languages, not just Scala, but Erlang and other things. So you want
feature that
specific feature or security layer or things like that. There's lots of good reasons for changing POS providers. Anyone else got a question?
Or a thought? I guess it's, in a way, it's almost like thinking of software as rather than software as a service, it's software as a package thing that runs as a service, right? And so it seems like we've had the software as a service around a long time, but without the POS part. So now as we start defining the POS part, where in the old days, software as a service just ran on wherever those guys were running it on that were offering as a service. But now people can create software, package it out, and give it to people to run as a service on things that people have given out to run as a platform to things that people have given to run out as an infrastructure node. So
service as a service.
Service as a service, I like that. So it's just an area that I see that's undefined and coming up, but there's always an area of things that got left out in the next big push, you know.
There's actually a precedent to this.
Yeah.
Content management systems like Drupal and WordPress have plugin and extension interfaces, and those are wild with innovation because it's very easy for a user of those CMSs to add those capabilities to their website. I would argue that those ecosystems that support that development are the reason why those CMSs are successful. So all
does it ever happen that WordPress and Drupal or counter equivalents actually formalize on what that API might be? Because that's almost where we're going, right? They say, "Ooh, any Drupal plugin will work on any WordPress or vice versa."
No, they're fundamentally incompatible, but the concept is essentially the same thing that we're talking about today, where you have a common runtime that you define, and then you have these extensions that run on top of it. So, and when we're talking about PaaS, we talk about apps, right? And when you think of it in the CMS case, you call them plugins or extensions or modules.
I see, yeah.
It's the same concept, and it will work.
Yeah.
The WordPress example is actually a really good one. Drupal, not so much in terms of helping developers of the plugins monetize their offerings too. And I think there's a good opportunity here for a different business model, sort of a play on the iPhone apps, or as I wave mine around. But if you can figure out how to get your open source project into the Cloud App Store, you can then offer an upsell of enterprise support for that, or you can figure out a way to offer that with extra types of plugs in that you can charge money for. So
I'd like to counter on that, though, for one second, because the one difference, though, is I think what we're talking about here is that you have the different governances. Like within Drupal, there's just the governance of Drupal, right? And so any plugin made for Drupal, you have all these people participating, and they all work to that interface. But it's easy for Drupal to say, oh yeah, this is the interface. What we're looking here is that we have, competitors trying to actually agree on this is what the plugin interface should be. So it's a little bit different, a little bit more challenging than I think that plugin interface.
I'm making the point that communities for distributing useful software is a concept that works.
Absolutely.
And that there's proof that it will work.
That's absolutely, and that's why Mark and I are competitors, but we work better as friends, because there's a lot to cooperate on, even in, I just heard the word co-opetition for the first time a few months ago, but yeah, in the competitive spaces, there's a lot to cooperate on. Well, I appreciate you all listening to this and for your input, and thank you.